In October 1943, a classified directive landed on the desks of artillery commanders across the European theater of operations. The order was direct and inflexible. The new VT proximity fuse, a weapon that could detect and destroy targets with unprecedented precision, was absolutely forbidden for use over land. Violations would not be tolerated. The ban held the weight of the highest military authority, and for good reason. The fuse was ranked alongside the atomic bomb and the breaking of the Enigma code as one of the three most closely guarded secrets of the entire war. The calculus was brutal in its simplicity. If a single VT-fused shell failed to detonate and fell into German hands, enemy scientists could reverse engineer the technology. The consequences would be catastrophic. Germany could replicate it, deploy it against Allied bombers over the Reich, and potentially blast the 8th Air Force and RAF from the skies. Intelligence assessments were clear. Losing this technological advantage could shift the entire trajectory of the air war. American and British commanders were willing to accept higher casualties from conventional artillery rather than risk the secret falling into enemy hands. Every shell that crossed the front lines carried this existential gamble. The technology itself was nothing short of revolutionary. Inside the nose of each artillery shell was a complete miniature radio station, transmitter, receiver, amplifier, and detonator, all packaged into a 6-inch-long, 3-inch diameter fuse body. The device transmitted radio waves as the shell hurtled through the air, then listened for the echo bouncing back from the target. When the reflected signal indicated the shell had reached optimal killing distance, typically within 50 feet of an aircraft or 20 feet above ground, the fuse triggered detonation. The result was an airburst that scattered lethal shrapnel in a devastating cone pattern, far more effective than shells that had to score a direct hit or rely on imprecise timed detonations. But building this marvel presented engineering challenges that bordered on the impossible. The components, including fragile glass vacuum tubes, had to survive the cataclysmic shock of being fired from a 5-inch naval gun. At the instant of firing, the shell experienced a setback force of 20,000 Gs as it accelerated from 0 to 2,800 feet per second in a fraction of a second. The shell then spun at 25,000 revolutions per minute as it raced through the rifled barrel. Any conventional vacuum tube would shatter instantly under such forces. The solution came from the Section T research team at Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Laboratory, led by physicist Merle Tuve. They developed specialized, ruggedized vacuum tubes with reinforced internal structures, cementing components into solid insulator blocks to eliminate any possibility of movement. Every element was designed to make the fuse as solid as a brick. The tubes were mounted rigidly to the projectile body, so the effective mass increased dramatically, reducing vibrational acceleration. Circuit designs were modified to minimize microphonic noise from vibration, and batteries were rebuilt with more rigid construction to prevent spurious voltages. The result was a vacuum tube that could function in an environment that would destroy virtually any other electronic device of the era, an engineering achievement that ranks among the most remarkable of the Second World War. Safety mechanisms were equally critical. The fuse incorporated mechanical and electrical safeguards to prevent premature detonation that could kill the gun crew. A mechanical clock prevented the fuse from functioning for 3 to 5/10ths of a second after firing. Reed spin switches ensured the device remained inert until the shell's rotation armed it. Self-destruct features prevented dud shells from surviving intact if they missed their targets. Every safety measure was designed to protect friendly forces while ensuring the technology could never be recovered by the enemy, a delicate balance that required thousands of hours of testing and refinement.
By 1943, the VT Fuze program had consumed over $1 billion in development costs, roughly $15 billion in today's currency. It was one of the largest wartime research projects undertaken by the United States, rivaling even the Manhattan Project in funding and scope. More than 22 million fuses were eventually produced, each containing approximately 130 miniaturized electronic components. The industrial mobilization required to manufacture these devices at scale involved thousands of workers across multiple contractors, all operating under strict security protocols. Yet, despite this massive investment and proven effectiveness in testing, the weapon remained locked away from European ground commanders, forbidden by the fear of what would happen if the Germans obtained even one intact example.
While European artillery commanders watched their new weapon gather dust in ammunition depots, the war in the Pacific became the proving ground for the VT Fuze's devastating potential. The restriction on land use didn't apply over open water. Any dud shell would sink into the ocean, safely beyond enemy reach. On January 5, 1943, aboard the light cruiser USS Helena near Guadalcanal, Lieutenant Red Cochran commanded the aft 5-inch battery that fired the first proximity-fused shells in combat. The second of 3 salvos destroyed a Japanese Val dive bomber in mid-attack. The results exceeded every projection from the testing phase. In August 1942, during shakedown trials aboard the light cruiser USS Cleveland in Chesapeake Bay, gunners had brought down 3 remotely controlled drone aircraft with just 4 bursts of proximity-fused fire. Now, facing combat conditions against veteran Japanese pilots, the Fuze proved even more lethal. Throughout 1943, proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire was credited with more than half of all Japanese aircraft destroyed by naval gunfire, despite the fact that only 25% of shells fired were equipped with VT fuses. The force multiplication was staggering. Each proximity-fused shell was worth 5 conventional shells in anti-aircraft effectiveness. The June 1944 Battle of the Philippine Sea, known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, demonstrated the technology's decisive impact on carrier warfare. American naval task forces equipped with proximity fuses and new fire control radar systems created a killing field that Japanese aviators could not penetrate. The battle involved 24 aircraft carriers deploying roughly 1,350 carrier-based aircraft, the largest carrier-to-carrier engagement in history. Japanese replacement pilots, already undertrained and inexperienced, flew into a wall of precisely timed airbursts that detonated with mathematical precision around their aircraft. The outcome was catastrophic for Japan. 65 of 75 Japanese fighters were shot down in a single engagement. Admiral Raymond Spruance's fleet suffered minimal aircraft losses, while effectively annihilating Japanese naval aviation as a strategic force. The proximity fuse, combined with superior American pilot training and numerical superiority, had rendered Japanese carrier doctrine obsolete. The technology proved equally devastating against Germany's V-1 buzz bomb terror campaign targeting London in mid-1944. The small, fast-flying bombs presented an exceptionally difficult target for conventional anti-aircraft fire. In June 1944, when the V-1 campaign began, only 17% of the flying bombs crossing the English coast were destroyed by anti-aircraft guns. But Section T engineers rapidly modified proximity fuses specifically for the V-1 threat, optimizing the detection parameters for the small, fast targets. By mid-July, Allied commanders rushed approximately 500 anti-aircraft guns equipped with proximity-fused ammunition to coastal installations along the English Channel, positioning them where dud shells would fall harmlessly into the sea. The results were immediate and dramatic.
British gunners integrated the proximity fuses with American SCR-584 radar systems that automatically tracked targets and calculated firing solutions. As V-1s crossed the coast, they entered a technological kill zone where effectiveness rates climbed from 17% to 74% over the course of the 80-day campaign. On one extraordinary day in late August 1944, coastal anti-aircraft batteries destroyed 82% of incoming V-1s. On the final day when large numbers of V-1s were launched against England, 104 were detected by early warning radar, but only 4 reached London. General Frederick Pyle, commanding British Anti-Aircraft Command, later stated bluntly that the proximity fuse made it possible for the nearly 100% success rates that Anti-Aircraft Command was obtaining regularly. American scientists had given Britain the final answer to the flying bomb. The technology had saved London from devastation, preventing casualties that would have been 4 to 5 times higher without the fuses. Meanwhile, across the English Channel, American artillery units in Europe faced German counterattacks with conventional fuses that wasted ammunition and failed to achieve decisive effects. The frustration was palpable. Artillerymen knew a weapon existed that could end engagements faster and save American lives, yet it remained forbidden, locked in ammunition depots under strict orders. The calculus had not changed. The risk of German reverse engineering still outweighed the tactical benefits. As winter approached and German resistance stiffened, that calculation was about to be tested by the most desperate German gamble of the war.
December 16, 1944, 5:30 a.m. Along an 85-mile front in the snow-covered Ardennes forest, 1,400 German tanks, 2,000 artillery pieces, and 20 divisions erupted from concealment in the largest German offensive operation since the invasion of France. Operation Wacht am Rhein, Hitler's last strategic gamble in the West, smashed into thinly held American lines defended by green troops and exhausted divisions sent to the quiet sector to rest. The weather was Hitler's ally. Thick cloud cover and winter storms grounded Allied tactical air power, neutralizing the overwhelming American advantage in close air support. Within hours, the German breakthrough had created a massive bulge into American positions, threatening to split the Allied front and potentially reach the vital port of Antwerp. At Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, the initial reports were fragmentary and alarming. General Omar Bradley remained non-committal about the scale of the attack, but General Dwight D. Eisenhower immediately grasped the danger. By evening on December 16th, he had ordered the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions to deploy by truck in an emergency race to the Ardennes, summoning the 18th Airborne Corps headquarters from England. The 2 elite divisions would serve as a stopgap, buying time for a coordinated counterattack. But Eisenhower's most powerful weapon, Allied air superiority, remained grounded by the weather. American infantry dug into frozen ground, while German panzers exploited breakthroughs, and conventional artillery struggled to halt mass German attacks across multiple penetration points. On December 19th, 4 days into the offensive, Eisenhower convened an emergency conference at Verdun, the site of World War I's bloodiest battle, with his senior commanders. Bradley, Patton, Devers, and key SHAEF staff officers gathered to coordinate the Allied response. Eisenhower's strategy was direct. Establish a stop line at the Meuse River, beyond which there would be no further retreat, then launch a massive counterattack. He turned to General George S. Patton and ordered him to disengage Third Army from operations in the Saar, wheel north, and strike the southern shoulder of the German salient with at least 6 divisions. It was an extraordinarily complex maneuver, pivoting an entire army 90 degrees in the middle of winter while maintaining combat effectiveness. Patton, characteristically confident, promised to attack within 48 hours. But as the conference concluded, a critical question remained. Could conventional artillery generate enough firepower to stop German infantry advancing through the dense Ardennes forests before they reached the Meuse River? The answer, based on current effectiveness rates, was uncertain.
American gunners were expending enormous quantities of ammunition to achieve limited results against German troops using the forest canopy and terrain for cover. Timed fuses, which required precise calculation of shell flight time to achieve airbursts, were notoriously unreliable and wasteful. Impact fuses only killed soldiers in the immediate vicinity of the explosion, allowing German infantry in foxholes and behind cover to survive even intensive barrages. Eisenhower made the decision that field commanders had been requesting for months. He authorized the use of VT proximity fuses against German ground forces. The order, transmitted on December 19th, represented a calculated gamble. The Supreme Commander was wagering that the tactical necessity of stopping the German offensive outweighed the strategic risk of the technology falling into enemy hands. The directive went out to ammunition depots across the theater. Break open the sealed crates marked POSIT, the code name for the proximity fuse program. Within hours, trucks loaded with proximity-fused shells were racing toward artillery positions throughout the Bulge sector. For artillery battery commanders, the moment was surreal. Weapons they had been forbidden to even discuss were suddenly arriving by the truckload, with orders for immediate combat employment. Gun crews broke open wooden crates stamped with the highest security classifications and began loading shells that looked externally identical to conventional rounds, but carried the power to transform the killing effectiveness of every gun on the line. One field artillery commander, facing a desperate situation near Ardennes, violated standing orders by using proximity fuses against German attacks on December 22nd, 3 days after Eisenhower's authorization, but before formal word reached his position. The gamble was about to be tested on the largest scale yet, not against aircraft or buzz bombs, but against massed German infantry in the worst winter conditions Europe had seen in decades. By December 21st, with restrictions formally lifted across the entire Bulge battlefield, American artillery battalions began coordinating time-on-target concentrations using proximity fuses. Multiple batteries would fire simultaneously, timing their shells to arrive over the target at precisely the same instant. When dozens of proximity-fused shells detonated together at optimal height above German positions, the effect was unlike anything seen in ground combat. Between December 22nd and December 29th, Patton's Third Army alone fired 50,000 proximity-fused shells into the southern shoulder of the German salient. The weapon that had been locked away for more than a year was now being expended at a rate of over 7,000 rounds per day. The Battle of the Bulge had become the proving ground for the most closely guarded artillery secret of World War II. By war end, more than 200,000 proximity-fused shells would be fired during the Battle of the Bulge alone.
The first proximity-fused shells fired against German ground troops detonated 20 feet above the snow-covered forest floor, sending a cone of steel fragments slicing downward through pine branches and into the frozen earth below. For German infantry sheltering in foxholes, positions that offered excellent protection against conventional impact-fused shells, the effect was catastrophic. The airbursts rendered cover meaningless. Shrapnel rained down into trenches, behind trees, and into depressions in the terrain where soldiers had taken shelter. There was no defense except deep bunkers, and the Ardennes forest offered few of those. A German prisoner of war, interrogated after his unit was shattered by a proximity-fused barrage near Ardennes on December 25th, described the experience in terms that captured the psychological impact as much as the physical destruction. He called the attacks quick, powerful bursts for which there was simply no defense. The phrase that appeared repeatedly in German prisoner interrogations was merciless, a word that conveyed not just the lethality, but the sense that traditional infantry tactics offered no countermeasure. Soldiers who had survived years of artillery bombardment on the Eastern Front reported they had never experienced anything comparable to the precision and inescapability of the American airbursts. On December 25th and 26th, Patton's Third Army used proximity fuses in concentrated barrages near Ardennes and in the defense of Bastogne, killing an estimated 700 German soldiers in coordinated strikes. This marked the first officially documented large-scale use of VT fuses against ground forces in the European theater. though unauthorized earlier use had occurred. The effectiveness was immediately apparent in casualty ratios and in the rapidity with which German attacks stalled when subjected to proximity-fused fire. Artillery observers reported that German infantry units, upon experiencing their first proximity-fused barrage, would break contact and withdraw, rather than continue assaults, a stark contrast to the fanatical determination German forces had shown earlier in the offensive. The technical advantages translated directly into tactical dominance. Each proximity-fused shell delivered 3 times the effectiveness of a conventional shell against ground targets. For anti-personnel use in forested or broken terrain, the multiplication factor was even higher, as the airbursts negated the protection offered by the landscape itself. German commanders, already struggling with fuel shortages, air superiority losses, and the failure to capture critical road junctions like Bastogne, now faced an artillery threat that fundamentally changed the calculus of infantry operations. Advancing through the Ardennes under proximity-fused fire was suicide. Defensive positions in the forest were death traps. The psychological impact compounded the physical destruction. German soldiers began calling the proximity-fused barrages the bell toll of death, a reference to the distinctive pattern of multiple simultaneous airbursts that characterized American time-on-target fire. When artillery battalions coordinated their fire so that dozens of shells arrived simultaneously over a target area and detonated together at optimal height, the effect was described by survivors as apocalyptic. The sound alone, multiple airbursts in rapid succession, each followed by the screaming descent of thousands of steel fragments, created a terror that broke unit cohesion even among veteran troops. By late December, German forces throughout the Bulge sector were reporting a new American secret weapon that made forest positions untenable. The nights were the worst. The flash of airbursts illuminating the forest canopy like lightning, followed by the sharp crack of detonations and the whistle of shrapnel tearing through branches. Sleep became impossible. Movement meant death. German officers found themselves unable to maintain offensive momentum when every advance corridor could be turned into a killing ground by precise American artillery fire.
The Battle of the Bulge ultimately failed not due to any single weapon, but because of overwhelming American material superiority, logistical resilience, and the ability to concentrate forces faster than the Germans anticipated. Yet the proximity fuse played a decisive role in accelerating the German collapse once Eisenhower's counteroffensive began. General Patton, not given to excessive praise of technology, stated bluntly, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us. I think that when all the armies get this shell, we will have to devise some new method of warfare." The weapon that had been forbidden for fear of German capture became the artillery innovation that helped crush Germany's last major offensive in the West. Eisenhower's gamble paid off. Despite firing hundreds of thousands of proximity-fused shells into German-held territory during the Bulge and subsequent operations, and despite German forces capturing approximately 20,000 intact fuses, enemy scientists never successfully reverse-engineered the technology before the war ended. In January 1945, German engineer Dr. Heinrich Becker examined captured VT fuses and submitted a detailed technical report. His analysis concluded that the American fuse program had been one of the largest wartime projects, rivaling even the atomic bomb in funding, and that the force multiplication it provided, combined with America's overwhelming production advantage, meant Germany had effectively lost the war. But by the time Becker's report reached decision-makers, it was too late for Germany to replicate the technology or develop effective countermeasures. The proximity fuse remained classified until September 1945, when the War Department finally acknowledged its existence, describing it as one of the most important weapons developed during the war, surpassed in effectiveness only by the atomic bomb. By war's end, American factories were producing 40,000 VT fuses daily, and more than 22 million had been manufactured. the technology fundamentally changed the nature of artillery warfare, proving that mass-producing effective weapons mattered more than crafting individually perfect systems. The balance between secrecy and necessity, between protecting technological advantage and deploying weapons when they were most needed, defined one of the critical command decisions of the European War. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes in December 1944, that balance tipped decisively toward necessity, and the secret weapon became the instrument of Germany's final defeat in the West.